Hey there, I'm Chroma, and welcome to part 3 of Making an Abstract Adventure. Welcome back. So this time, we've been working on making health and hazards for our game. So let's start off by just jumping into play mode and showing how it's all working so far. I'm temporarily going to disable our cube character, so we just are dealing with our sphere character for now. So at the top, we have our health units, which is a bunch of circles, and each time we get hit, we basically lose one. So we have these spike hazards over here as well, that each time we touch them, we take damage. We lose one of our circle health point things, we flicker, we get launched into the air, and for just like a split second, it disables all movement and whatnot. So yeah, that's all how this is operating right now. And if we completely die, at the moment there isn't any sort of fancy death thing, and just the scene resets after a few seconds. That is temporarily and will be replaced with something that looks better later on. And then for our cube character, we have the same system, just with cube health, so I won't bother showing that off. It's basically just the same, just on the other side of the screen. So depending on which type of level we're in, we'll either have the sphere character with the sphere health, or the cube character with the cube health. As well, going over to our actual health UI things right here, I have a fancy slider here. We can change how much health we have. So if I set that to 3, then we only have 3. And the plan is that we'll start only with 3 units of health. And then as we go through the game, we unlock having 4 and then 5. So there'll be a bit of progression in there as things get harder. All right, so now let's go into more so of how this is actually being done behind the scenes. So first of all, on our player health script that we have on both players, we have this flicker time and the flicker number, which controls the being turned on and off of the sprites to have that flicker effect. The reload delay of how long until we can take damage again, just having a few invulnerability frames. Knockback height that's for the being launched into the air, and the very small disable time of not being able to move or anything like that, which is very short, but it's enough for the knockback to work correctly without other player inputs messing with it. So yeah, and then getting a reference to the health UI there. So now let's go into code and show how that's actually all working, starting with the player health and then going to the player UI that works off of it. So first of all, we have the public variables that I just explained. Then we have a couple of private variables. Private int for the current amount of health that we have, a boolean for whether or not we can be damaged at the moment, which works with the disable time, an array of references to all of the image, because at the moment, the moment our cube, or both of them, have 2 small images on the inside for the design. That's temporary. Eventually it'll just be 1 sprite when we add more detail, but for now, that's how we're doing that. So getting reference to all of them to be able to turn them on and off, getting reference to the rigid body for the knockback into the air, and getting reference to the circle main script to be able to disable it temporarily for like the split second when we can't move. So in our start function, first of all, setting the current health to on our UI script to what that max health slider's value was, then setting can be damaged to true, then getting references to all of our images, to the rigid body and the circle main component. And at the moment, the cube character also has the component called circle main. That's also temporary. Eventually it'll have its own like square main, and then we'll have how that gets handled later. But for now, they're the same, because both scripts would be the same until we actually have differences between our 2 characters with their abilities and all that. Anyway, then onto our onTrigger stay function, which happens every frame that we're in contact with any colliders. We test if I've made a collider called kill, and that'll mainly be used for falling out of the map into a void. It'll basically cause an instant death thing. Otherwise, if the collider is, I've made 2 tags, one for hazard and one for enemy, and the reason that there's both is because I'm imagining later on when I make attacking and all that, I'll probably want 2 different tags because enemies will be able to be damaged and hazards won't be, or something like that. If I need more tags or need to change them, then eventually I'll do that. But for now, this will work for temporariness. And then we call this damage function if we hit either of those. So then to our damage function, first we test if we can be damaged based on that Boolean. If we can, then we subtract 1. Anything that can hurt our player will only do 1 unit of damage just to keep things simple, or it'll be an instant death thing. If I eventually decide to have things that can do like 2 units of damage or something, then that can be changed later on. So then we test if our current health is less than or equal to 0. The less than shouldn't ever really apply, but that's just making sure nothing breaks, I guess. Then making it so that we can't move, and then calling the death function down here that we'll get to in a moment. If we're not dead, then doing the knockback and the disabling by setting the rigid body velocity to 0 in case we're falling or going up, just making the knockback consistent, then adding the force in the same way that we did with our jump with the knockback height, and then starting these 2 coroutines for the temporary disabling and the flickering. And in both cases, then we, on our health UI, call a script that we're going to look at in a second called health change that takes as input our current health so it can update the UI to match. And eventually, the UI will also have probably more fancy stuff with how it looks as opposed to just being circles. But again, that sort of polishes stuff that we'll get to in time. So now, onto our death coroutine. First so if the current health is less than or equal to 0, first we just make sure of that by setting it to 0. Again, just trying to like make sure that any bugs that might happen, hopefully there won't be any, but if there is, then just trying to have some countermeasures for things not being completely broken. Then we go through, in a for each loop, go through all the sprite renderers from our images array here, and for each one of them, we set it to false, basically just turning off the player existing, I guess, but not completely destroying their game objects so that this code can still run. And then we wait a few seconds, and then we just, at the moment, reload the scene, but eventually we'll have more stuff with, like, playing an animation, bringing up some kind of menu to be able to restart the level, or any of that sort of stuff. If we have lives, then that will also be a factor. Checkpoints, also, all of that stuff will be handled in time when we get to, as we build those things. But then if we're not dead and we do the flickering, then first of all, we set can be damaged to false temporarily. Then for that flicker number that we set, we go through, having a for loop that goes through it that many times. And then for each iteration, we wait a few seconds, and that is the flicker time divided by 2, divided by the flicker number, divided by 2, because we're running this twice in the for loop. These numbers are kind of arbitrary. There's just how I decided to do things, I guess. Then in this for loop, we, similar to up here, actually exactly the same, getting the references to all of the sprite images, turning them off, waiting another really small amount of time, and then getting all of them again, and then setting them to true, and basically a for loop that just does that a bunch of times really fast. There might be a more efficient way of doing this, but it's simple enough to work for us for now. So yeah. Then we set can be damaged to true again. And then the temp disable script, we get a reference to the circle main, set to false, and then wait like a fraction of a second, and then set it to true again. All right, so that's all done. Now the health UI script is even shorter. The slider was set up by creating an int, and then in front of it just having this exact thing here, range, and then the smallest number, and then the largest number, and it works like that. Whoa. If, not that. If we set it to a float, then you could have a slider of float values. This is just something fancy you can do in the editor, so yeah, why not? Then we have a private array of game objects for all the damage sprites. Back in Unity for a second, on our actual health UI script, how that's being set up behind the scenes is that we have 5 different health sprites that represents each full circle. and then under it is a damage sprite that is the black circle, and then turning that off makes it look like the full circle. For now, again, when we do more stuff later on, this all could change, but this works for now, so that's how we're doing it. So we're getting a reference to each one of these damage sprites so that when we take damage, we turn it off or on. And then also at the beginning with the health sprites, if our max health is only 3, then disabling the other 2. So back in our code. So we get our references to all of... here, initializing our damage sprites array, there's going to be 5 elements in it. Then making this temporary variable for one of our health sprites. Then going through hard-coded to 5, because we're only ever going to have a max health of 5, as is planned right now. Then our health sprite, we find it by using the transform.find, getting the health sprite with the number attached to it based on I, to string for the find command to work with the I plus 1, converting it to a string so that all works. So we get our health sprite thing, and then our damage sprite that we assign to it is this dot find the damage sprite dot game object. So we get that reference, and then we set its active state to false because the player is going to start with full health. And then if our current I value is greater than or equal to the max health, then we disable this whole health sprite because it shouldn't exist. Then in our public health change variable that we saw being called over in our player health that takes as input the current health integer, we go through a for loop for up until our max health, and then or starting at our max health, going down to our current health, and going down, and then activating those damage sprites so that it looks like we've taken damage for that. At the moment, there's no system for gaining health. Actually, I guess we could just pass in a negative number here, and that probably would work for gaining health. So that should work. But eventually, if we have a case where you have, like, when you touch a checkpoint, you get full health, or if you have some kind of med kit healing system, power-ups, whatever, then we can do that. But again, for now, this works just fine. So, back in Unity then, one last thing is these spikes here. I'll go into how I actually made them. This is also temporary. Eventually, I would probably make an actual sprite for this sort of spike system. But at the moment, it is just a bunch of white squares that are rotated and stretched into that spike shape. Some of them are black, some of them are red, and then they just have a square collider over them that is has the tag hazard. And by having this be a child object and rotating it, and then having the parent, stretching the parent, that causes this stretching, squishing effect, I guess, for just a cube sprite. So yeah, that is how that's done. But eventually, it has wonky effects if I try to squish or stretch the child. So that's mildly interesting, I guess. But yeah, little things like this are good for temporariness, and maybe I might keep it. But at the moment, the colliders are a bit skewed, which probably wouldn't be good for now. Well, for now it's fine, but later on it'd probably be better for this whole thing to have just one uniform box collider. It'd probably be better for optimization and all that anyway. But yeah, so that works for now. But anyway, that'll be it for this episode. Next time, I think I'm going to go start to work on the things that'll be unique for each character. Or maybe I'll start working on attacking, something like that. But yeah, for now, that is the end of this episode. So, thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I'll see you around.